Hi there, friends. Welcome to episode 54 of Knit Talk with a Tech Editor. I'm Megan of the Unapologetic Knitter, and I'm a tech editor. Today is hopefully the last week of hot temperatures here in Oregon, and hopefully wherever you are too. As I'm recording this, we are hitting 83 degrees outside. And boy, oh boy, I am a winter activities kind of person, so I am very much looking forward to the fall weather settling in. I hope wherever you are watching from that the seasons are treating you well. So today's episode was inspired by some yarn that I picked up on my recent trip home to Canada. I was able to visit Ancient Arts Yarn, their actual storeroom, while I was in Calgary with my mom. We decided to take an impromptu yarn crawl around some of our shops in Calgary. And while I was not looking for yarn, when I found this gorgeous yarn, I couldn't say no. I'm a big fan of working with black yarns, and when I find a black that is this black, that's it. All bets are off. This is the Herlig DK. So Herlig, according to Google Translate, is a Norwegian word that translates to lovely in English, and they are not wrong. This yarn is lovely. Not only is the color way in my wheelhouse, but it is a combination of 50% Viking Norway wool and 50% merino. So it's got that gorgeous sheen of merino and it's quite smooth, but it's got the loftiness of a more rustic yarn. I'm going to have to do a little bit more research into what Viking Norway wool is on its own, but suffice to say, I am absolutely loving knitting this up. So I have turned it into a shawl design, which I may or may not publish, kind of depends how I'm feeling, but I like to do a lot of TV knitting, so my patterns are often quite simple. In this case, it's a combination of garter stitch and stockinette stitch, just on a traditional triangular shawl. But we've also got some yarnovers in the design. And although I have looked at this issue in the past, I thought it would be a great talking point when we're looking at yarnovers used in lacework, however basic, when you're trying to mirror a pattern over a center line. So we're going to take a look at some top-down examples and talk about how we construct yarnovers and why they're maybe not all considered exactly the same. So I've knit up a very simple swatch to try and show you how our yarnovers play with the fabric around it and how they can change in size. I've just worked a combination of stockinette stitch and reverse stockinette stitch adjacent each other in various numbers of stitches. The stitch counts aren't really important. It's more just taking a look at how the stitches stacked up. So this swatch is not blocked, so bear with me here. I'm going to try and pull these apart so you can compare the two sections. And I'm realizing now they kind of look like little faces, but there you go. So over these two sections here, we've got stockinette stitch, meaning knit on the right side and purl on the wrong side, and reverse stockinette stitch. It's purled on the right side, knits on the wrong side. So we've got one yarn over here and two yarn overs on each side above. I was just trying to keep the fabric mirrored. If we take a look specifically just at this bottom one where we have a single stitch in each section, the size of stitch is very, very similar. The yarn is wrapped around going from knit stitch around the needle to knit stitch in this case, or purl stitch around the needle and purl stitch in this case. I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like just so we have a baseline of our stitches. So when we're going from knit stitch, yarn over, knit stitch, our working yarn begins in the back, goes under the needle, around the front of the needle, and to the back again before we knit our next stitch. So if you think of the rotation around the needle as being one full rotation, we just moved our yarn 360 degrees around the needle to create that yarn over. If we go to our purl section, we're going to see the exact same thing, but with our yarn beginning and ending in the opposite location. So when we're going purl stitch, yarn over, purl stitch, we begin with our yarn in front, we wrap it over the needle, behind the needle, and back around to the front again to purl the next stitch. So the yarn has traveled the same distance. We're going 100% or 300 degrees, or 360 degrees around the needle to create one new loop. So this yarn over here is exactly the same as this yarn over here in terms of the distance it travels around the needle. When we get over to the second half of our work, we begin to see a fairly significant difference between our stitches. Here we have a yarn over created between a knit stitch and a purl stitch. And at the opposite edge of this reverse stockinette stitch section, we create our yarn overs between a purl stitch and a knit stitch. The difference in size of hole created by the yarn over is pretty significant. If I allow the fabric to relax entirely, these yarn overs almost entirely disappear. Now, caveat from earlier, I did say that I had not blocked this swatch, and this is a little bit like our transition between knits and purls in ribbing. The purl stitches do tend to recede a little bit behind the knit stitches, so any difference in size of hole will be mitigated somewhat by the adjacent stitches if the holes are made in the purl or the reverse stockinette stitch fabric. But if we pull it apart and pretend that this is a shawl and we're going to be blocking it really large, you can see that there's a significant difference between the size of stitch between a knit to a purl than there is between a purl to a knit. And here's why. If we are knitting our stitches before the yarn over, I've got 1, 2, 3 to get over to our fabric. Our yarn, when we're working a knit stitch, is in the back of our needle. When we purl a stitch, it's in front of the needle. So to work this yarn over, you're going to bring your yarn around to the front, just like you would for a knit stitch, yarn over knit stitch. But to be able to purl the next stitch, we're going back to the front of the needle again before we purl. So in essence, we have wrapped our yarn 1.5 times around the needle. I believe that works out to 540 degrees. So we went from back all the way around to the back again, and then through to the front one more time. So we're creating a longer travel of our working yarn between a knit and a purl stitch. And that results in a fairly significantly sized hole. When we do the reverse and we go from a purl stitch to a knit stitch, our yarn is actually traveling the shortest distance it can to create a new stitch. So we're going to end with a purl stitch, and then to create the yarn over, we simply move the working yarn to the back behind the needle and knit the next stitch. There's no additional wrapping or movement of the yarn that it needs to occur, so the yarn is simply moving from in front to the back. So it's almost like it's only traveling 180 degrees or 50% of the way around the needle. Now, these are of course approximations of how far the yarn is moving, but just to give you an idea, percentage-wise or degrees-wise, we say that between a knit stitch and a knit stitch, or a purl stitch and a purl stitch, we travel 100% or 360 degrees around the needle. Between a knit stitch and a purl stitch, we're going 150% around the needle or 540 degrees because we go from back to front, or pardon me, yes, back all the way around to the back and then again to the front. And lastly, for a purl to a knit stitch, we're going about 50%. We just go from front to back simply by crossing the yarn in front of our needles. So that's why I believe that yarnovers are not all considered equal. They just create such a variety of sizes or different sizes of holes based on the stitches that you're working before and after the yarn over. Okay, folks, we're going to wrap it up there for the week. I hope you enjoyed taking a closer look at Yarnovers. If you have any questions about the material in today's video, please feel free to leave a comment below. In 2 weeks' time for our next episode, we are going to take a look at increases as well, but we're not going to be looking necessarily just at Yarnovers. We're going to be talking about what you can and can't do, or maybe should and shouldn't do when you are looking at using increase stitches in your work. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and as always, happy knitting.